morning, everyone. I'm actually going to go first. Can you hear me without the mic? Yeah, I'd rather go without the mic right in. So 10 minutes as an academic will be a stretch. But let's, I guess before I get started, really want to acknowledge Heather on this. This was actually a large part of Heather's master's when I supervised her 9 years ago. I think it's important to acknowledge that background. Basically, my interest in this field, it's funny, my mother was a psychiatric nurse. So I guess growing up, issues around mental health were often discussed. And certainly over the last couple of years, it's even become more important and more prevalent. So I'm just going to do one slide. There's no shortage of information around mental health. Loose stats is 1 in 5 people at some point in their lives will have an issue of what could be called a diagnosed mental illness. World Health Organization says 4 of the leading 10 global disabilities are mental health. So I'll give you some just broad spectrum. On the slides, by the way, in the back page, there are some links there to some very good Canadian resources on these things. But a couple of quick points. Mental Health Commission in Canada, over the last couple of years, anxiety in youth has increased 48% in the last 10 years. Right? So that's youth, 10 to 12. That's, 12 to 18. That's the folks entering into our labor force. This was a shocker to me. Almost 1/3 of all CPP claimants now are due to mental health issues. The largest group of people entering and starting CPP claims. 28.4% of workers state that most days at work are quite a bit stressful or extremely stressful. 16.5% of caregivers report very high levels of stress. And the reason I want to emphasize that stat, it's not just the 1 in 5, it's around the people that are also supporting them that are often in your workplace as well. And finally, the economic cost of mental health is $50 billion for 2.8% of GDP in 2011. So I guess, and to make a long and short story out of this, the impacts of mental health in the workplace are real and significant, both from a personal, employer, and overall economic state. Given those trends, when Heather and I started this a number of years ago, I won't bore you with long discussions of the law, but I'm sure many of you are aware of the fact that mental health is covered under all Canadian legislation as a disability. And under that disability, there is the duty to accommodate, which basically just means that the employer must take good faith efforts to enable the person to perform the job. And that will become very important when Heather gets into the findings, when we look at one of the questions we were looking at is how do co-op workers react to accommodation? Because at the end of the day, when you're accommodating one person, arguably the perception of the employees, well, that can have a negative impact on them. So when Heather was designing this, she also wanted to make sure we got a good sense of perceptions around the duty to accommodate and what accommodations, I'll use the words loosely, were deemed to be more and less acceptable from their prospective peers. So really, these were kind of the things we were looking at. And it's tough as an academic to summarize 30 pages in 3 slides, but here we go. One, if employees felt others were treated fairly, how did that impact them? In particular, when we talk about impact, we'll get into issues around disclosure. If I break an arm, it's pretty obvious. I've worked with someone who's able-bodied and now walks with a cane. That's pretty obvious. Many of the issues around mental health require disclosure. Someone has to disclose. So we wanted to look at the issue of disclosure and factors that would make disclosure less or more likely. Whether or not someone would seek treatment for mental illness. Hats off to Bell, by the way, in terms of my telecommunications background, it wasn't Bell, so I don't want to sound like I'm promoting a former employer. They've done a lot of good work around awareness of mental health, trying to get at the stigma. And that's also been the big issue with actually people seeking help, is because there's so much stigma around having a mental illness. I think only the jokes you would have heard as a child, and we still hear about Waterford insane and things like that. So we also want to look at the issues around seeking. We were wondering whether or not having contact with someone with mental health would impact how you perceive some of these things. And we felt that you could argue that if you had contact, you may be more or less likely to support certain accommodations. I would argue growing up in a family where my mother worked a large part of her career in psychiatry made me look at issues around mental health differently than someone who didn't have that exposure. Just wanted to look at contact. And a big one I want to highlight that Heather will get into in terms of her presentation is just looking at accommodations. What do coworkers perceive as reasonable and fair in terms of accommodations. By the way, I should be clear, it really doesn't matter what coworkers think or believe in. There's a duty to accommodate that will require certain things. But we were interested just to see, are there accommodations that are, for lack of a better term, easier sells to enable things versus not. So that gives you a sense. Because it was Heather's study, I'd really like her to get into the findings and things. So I'm going to pass over to Heather for the findings. I'll just get that slide up for Heather.
Okay, great, thanks. And I started, this research was important to me because I grew up with somebody who in university or in school actually had a mental illness, and we didn't really understand it. So I'm 45, I don't know if anyone's around that age, but it really wasn't understood years ago. And she had such great difficulties getting employment, and still does. It's a relatively one of these more severe illnesses, but I saw her struggle, and it was just something that I was very passionate about. So when you actually look at the findings, one of the key things is sort of, and we were talking about coworkers, just quickly on coworkers, because a lot of studies were around, what the manager was doing and what the employee was doing. But we all know, let's face it, in the workplace, the impact that I have on someone else in the workplace is significant. How you feel about what other people are doing, how other people feel about you is going to impact how you feel in your work, what it feels like to work in your environment. Okay, so that coworker has a huge impact on what you're going to say or not say in the workplace. So the more you felt that your employer was treating people with mental illness fairly, the more likely you were to disclose a mental illness and also seek assistance for mental illness. So we all know disclosure is critical. From a health perspective, people need to get assistance, and if they're going to be having a full life, that includes employment. And contact, the more contact you have, so as Travor said, we want to see how people, if they worked in an environment, if they had relationships with people with mental illness, did it increase the chances? And yes, you're more likely to support hiring of coworkers with a mental illness if you've had more contact, or contact and the more contact you have. Okay? Go ahead. Accommodations are not all equal. Okay? We all think, oh, the duty to accommodate. So you've got to accommodate the person. Okay, it just has to happen. It just has to happen. But let's look at what you actually are doing in the workplace. Ironically, after this, I worked in healthcare briefly, and I saw this firsthand, ironically, after we did the study about how certain environments, there was a lot of accommodations going on, and they had significant impact on some of the people around them. So if you actually look at Travers likes to color code it. So,
although it appears I missed one.
Yes, I know. That's
this is why you have research assistants, Heather. All right.
Neither of us are really detail-oriented, so that's okay. But when you look at the least supported, so longer or more frequent breaks. Okay, just conversely, before I talk about that, flexible work hours, banking of overtime, and increased supervision were more accepted. So how many people here would have flexible work hours, banking overtime in their organizations right now? Right. So it makes it a little easier, doesn't it? Right? Sometimes it's a little easier. We'll talk about that after. But longer or more frequent breaks. So that's going to impact the people around you probably dramatically. Right? If I'm going to take a lot longer break, who's going to do the work? You're not going to get someone to come in and fill for 10, 15 minutes. Right? If you're actually taking time off, so in the healthcare, which we were looking at, the healthcare environment, if people are off for an extra day, they'll get someone to substitute. Right? But that extra long break isn't necessarily, you're not necessarily going to get relief for. So there's an impression, there's potentially, we were thinking about it, and that could be one of the key components to it. Having said that, you all have different work environments. So what does that mean for you? This study was done in a healthcare environment, and it certainly could have been impacted by the policies they had. But you have to remember they're not all created equal. The impact that someone has on another worker would be a big significant component here. All right, Travor. So what do you do? So in your organization, so you've got fair treatment. How in the world do you promote that? Okay? So if you want to be an organization that's seen or deemed to be treating people with mental illness fairly, then you've got to take a stand and actually promote that. You could promote it in terms of communications. You know, think of the Let's Talk. You can do it in terms of your policies. Who has a respectful workplace policy? Right. How much of that in there, the wording, actually talks about mental illness? How much of the training is actually talks about it? Maybe get someone in when you do training. A lot of you guys have training. have someone in if possible. Now some of them are off-site, etc. Like if you're off in a camp or something, it's different. But if you could get somebody in to actually speak on behalf of it, the Canadian Mental Health Association would absolutely find someone to come in and talk to you, to your group, and help them understand it more. Okay? So the policies, and you know policies as well as I do, if any of the HR folks or senior leaders here, unless you follow them, it doesn't work. So imagine what it's like to be in a fair environment that, yeah, you put it on paper, but you're not actually enforcing it. It has to be enforced. Those are some key components that you could have in terms of the first bullet there. In terms of accommodations, again, they're not treated equally. So how can you look at your environment? What makes sense for each job? So if you have someone in there who's disclosed or you're hiring someone with a mental illness, look at the job requirements. I can almost guarantee that their medical professional who's going to help support you in this or help support the person in this will actually work with you to make it acceptable to the workplace. Because if I know that my coworkers aren't going to be significantly impacted, I'm going to feel much better. I'm the one with the mental illness. Right? I'm going to know that they're going to be more accepting of it. So wait it out, check it out, ask them. Right? Here's some accommodations, and do a little survey. And ask them what accommodations are more acceptable. But generally, you'll have a sense of which jobs are more, which accommodations will apply for those positions. Do you backfill the position, or does somebody else have to take on extra work, as an example? And increasing contact. Look to the community organizations. I mean, who's out there that can support? The Canadian Mental Health Association could find somebody to come and have a talk. Can you guys, how many people here do events where you go and support a charity? A few of you guys? Yeah. So go out and actually see if you can actually work with an organization that deals with mental illness. Increase the level of contact, people's comfort level. If they start talking to people, it's guaranteed, 1 in 4 people, they know people who have mental illness in the workplace, but they don't know they have it, because a lot of times they don't self-disclose. So go in an environment where people are openly talking about it. So maybe have a team building session there, or have volunteer hours that you can commit to that, or have it as an organization that you're going to support that year in volunteer time. It's one thing to throw money at it, which is great, but to get people to have increased contact is what we learned from our study. So there's just a few things that you can do in your organization that might be helpful to help those 1 in 4 that are actually already in your workplace.